Welcome to the Intentional Health for Women podcast. I'm your host, Garrett GQ Query. This podcast is dedicated to developing intentional health for women. Former 400-pound fat man turned health and fitness professional, specializing in women's health. In this podcast, you will find over a decade of experience in the health and fitness industry, serving women to become their most intentional self through strength training, nutrition, and lifestyle practices. Each week, we will dive into a variety of different topics, ranging from interviews with women leading the way in the health and fitness industry, client case studies throughout the years, myth busting, social media trends, female hormones, gut health, and so much more. We are not normal. We are intentional. Welcome to another episode of the Intentional Health for Women podcast. I'm your host, Garrett GQ Query, and I'm joined today by Chris Shade, founder of Quicksilver Scientific. Welcome.
Happy to be here, Garrett.
Yeah, welcome. So jumping right into things, Chris, probably a little bit of a different approach than you've ever experienced is like, what was probably one of the lowest points in your life?
Lowest points in my life. Oh, I mean, that's a question. You know, now we're in the middle of the LA fires, and just a few years ago, we had fires. It was called the Marshall Fire in Louisville, Colorado. We lost what we thought was a huge amount of houses, 1,000 houses, and I was right in the middle of that, and it was 3 months and 8 days after my divorce. And then, the house I was in just burned right down to rubble. And I could say, that was low, but very clarifying space. And so my heart goes out to everybody who's just lost everything. I've been through all that. And, I did say then, I'd been Tibetan Buddhist for so long and in all these mystical traditions, and we talk about the light that's underneath everything. And I will say, if you have some bit of faith in your heart and everything burns away that was clouding you from that, you do have a moment of just total clarity. That's the only thing left. And while your emotions are raw, that's the only thing that you have left.
So was this this was a new home that you had just recently purchased?
Well, no, I mean, it wasn't that bad. I had just moved there. I left my ex-wife in our home. And so a lot of the family stuff was there, but she had offloaded all of these pictures and stuff to me just recently. And I had a huge collection of books. I had a lot of spiritual, mystical, old rare books and stuff, and those all burned to the ground. But, within a couple of months after that, I ended up with a Tibetan monk living at my house. My very old teacher died, and his wife donated all of his books and all of his stuff to me. So everything came back around pretty nicely.
Full circle, yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And the other lowest point, sort of biochemically, when I first got into this business, I thought that I was going to be, I had an analytical testing company, and I could test for forms of mercury, and I developed the first of its kind to separate the kind of mercury from fish versus the mercury from amalgams. And I thought I was just going to be doing testing around that, not developing a whole system for removing mercury and other metals from people. And I started taking all the chelators, these things. DMSA was this chelator I was taking. Then I got all my amalgams out in one day, and I started just trying to move all this mercury out, and I'm testing it and stuff. And this led to me understanding everything that I know about detoxification, because it just sunk me into the ground, because it wasn't moving metals out. It was just stirring the pot and moving them all around. And I remember just sinking deeper and deeper and deeper. My adrenals were just fucked, and my brain. And I remember driving right through a red light, and these guys skidding to a halt, somehow not killing all of us at once. And I was like, oh my God, I got to fix this. And I was on my way to a lecture where I think Bob Roundtree was talking about the gut and immunity and toxins in it. And I was like, what am I doing? Why am I trying to push all this metal through my kidneys? I should be moving it. I should be clearing out the gut. clearing out the liver and moving all this stuff through the liver down to the gut, binding it there and moving it on. And I saw the path, like right in that darkness. I say the dark night of my biochemical soul. I was like, I actually have the materials. I used them from something else. We used to gather all the mercury out of a couple gallons of water and focus it into one place so we could measure it. And I was like, that's exactly what you can put through the GI and pick all this stuff up. And it became this product we called IMD. And that was I made that. I fixed like in 2-3 weeks, I was better. And that became the basis of all of our detox systems moving forward. And then I added everything on, liposomal glutathione, these different, bile flow up regulators, liver stuff, kidney stuff, all the, stuff to get the cells to kick stuff out. And it built all the systems from there. And so, it was from that low point that I saw my way through to opening up the body to detoxify in an accelerated but natural way.
How did you develop the mercury poisoning in the first place?
Well, we all have it to a certain degree.
Yeah.
I mean, well, not we all have it to a certain degree. All of the people my age had it to a certain degree because everybody had the old
Mercury
silver fillings.
Yeah.
Silver fillings were 50% mercury. They're mercury fillings. And I had 17 of them. And, you're either going to get it from the fillings, from the fish you're eating, or from vaccines. Now, vaccines, the mercury in the vaccines is all gone now. Fish is still significant. And now mostly we get the white fillings. Unless you're pouring on Medicaid, then you're still mercury poisoned. So anybody who had those had some degree of mercury poisoning. And the unique thing about the amalgams is you would inhale stuff that's evaporating off the surfaces, and that would go into the lungs, into the blood, and all over. But there was corrosion products, kind of like rust coming off of the metal, and you'd swallow those, and they coat your GI tract, and they kind of lock it up. They change the microbes in it, and they block the liver GI connection so that the liver's not, the liver actually, because it sees so much mercury in the GI, it decides to stop dumping more into it. And so it locks up that liver drainage. And that's why what we call a binder, the first product called IMD, intestinal metal detox, were little grains of silica gel with metal chelating groups on them, these thiol groups on them. And you would eat it and it would clear all this mercury off of the lining of your GI that you've been swallowing all the time and open up that flow back in there. And so that was the thing that was so bad about the mercury amalgams is one form goes into you and the other form blocks the way out. And so that was where I got my source, from growing up with these amalgams. And I remember, growing up and being, maybe like 13, 14, and I started having this temper where I would, and it was always like inanimate objects would piss me off. I was big into music, and back then it was vinyl, and my records would skip, and I would like put a hole through my wall, these old plaster walls, and it was like, and that just came on right about when that was all happening, and right when that came on when I started getting the fillings all in and stuff, and so it was very nice to get rid of those and detox, and then I realized what. There's a lot of this that's significant to women, but when you get these kind of poisonings out that you've been dealing with for a long time, your natural level goes up so high, your energy level, your adrenal level, your brain level, your liver ability to handle things. It's stuff you didn't even realize you lost because you'd lost it for so long. And that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about thorough detoxification is it can unlock so much more potential in you.
Love it. So as I was kind of doing some research and diving into, who is Chris Shade, you wrote on February 1st of 2019, "It's hard to come to grips with how beautiful our mother was. Look into her eyes. She waited until all essentials were there and she was ready to fly away, home. She loves us all." What does that mean to you?
Well, that was when she died.
Okay.
And I got a call. My father had died 6 months before on Father's Day. He was an ironic guy, and he died on Father's Day. And this is, about 6 months later. And I got a call like, whoa, she's going down. Because we thought she'd be able to come up and get a couple more years. He was kind of dragging her down. And she was starting to get a little better and then got some big infection. And they're like, you got to get out of here now.
Yeah.
And so I flew out there and I bought a little speaker on the way, like, one of these little JBLs. So at her hospital bed, I could play Mass in B minor for her. Bach's Mass in B minor was her favorite thing. And I got there. My sister was there already. Some of my nephews got there. And then she died. It was beautiful when she died. We had a day of like playing this music and her, all of her favorite stuff and her kind of knowing we were there. And then the next day, she wasn't really conscious, just going. And she had this, there was a minister at our church. We were Moravians, and we had a lot of islanders. And I think this guy was Jamaican. It was a big black guy with
So you say flight? You flew there?
I flew from Colorado. Like I got the call, just grab whatever I had with me and flew to Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And saw her, and so she waits for this minister to come, and he gives this little prayer. And she goes from just like unconscious and breathing to it's the death breath. You go, and then goes into that. And then he says another prayer. And he says, this time we'll bring in the guests. And in Tibetan Buddhism, they talk, the guests are people who aren't there. And so we name all the people that couldn't get there and bring them all in and just stops breathing. It was beautiful.
Yeah. That's incredible. So 6 months apart in 2019.
Yeah.
That's wild. Or 2018 and 2019.
Yeah. And, actually, I think that was 2017.
Okay.
And that was on the anniversary of her death.
Oh, sure.
That I wrote that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you grew up like Tibetan the whole time?
No. I picked that up later. I got into college and, I was very agnostic. I went through and got confirmed and this and that, keep my mom happy. But I was very agnostic until, a big hit of acid and, had very classic religious experience. And it was like, gates of heaven opening, Gabriel's horn and stuff. And it shifted me 180 degrees.
Okay.
And I started getting into all the different mystical traditions. I started with Zen and then Taoism and did some martial arts around that and I got into Western Hermetic stuff and then eventually settled in around Dzogchen, which is one of the Tibetan traditions and the Tibetan Buddhist and Bon lineages, and met who became my main teacher from that. And I don't know, I was 2000, 2001, 2002. And I've been doing that since then. Okay. I still do, I do some Taoist stuff. And I know all about it all, but that's my main practice.
Okay.
Certainly my parents didn't raise me that way.
Right.
My dad was, agnostic, and my mom was this Moravian Protestant.
Interesting. I've never heard of that denomination.
Moravians. Now, they were a little group from Czechoslovakia. Well, it's sort of the Czech area of Germany and Czechoslovakia. In that area, there was a place called Moravia, and they were super progressive. It goes up to Jan Hus and then Martin Luther, but they were focused on education and medicine. So this was an easy group to be raised by. There was like people, they're all like, traumatized by their Catholic upbringing. This is pretty simple. They weren't all on you about stuff.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were obviously very close with your mom. What was your relationship growing up?
She was super loving, and we both had this glowing red curly hair, and she was shorter, but she would work a lot. I was a bit of a latchkey kid, but then the one I remember the most, the year I remember the most is when we lived in Ireland. My dad took a Fulbright scholarship and taught at the University of Galway. So we lived there, and she couldn't work. And I went to a little Catholic school. And I realized why Catholics are so screwed up by that. But I went to a little Catholic boys' school around the corner, and I would come home for lunch every day, and she'd make me soup and a sandwich. And I just remember, all that about her, that caring, lovingness, and it was like a little bit of a mini me thing, with the red curly hair, and yeah, I mean, my dad was much more austere and distant, and she was, warm and cuddly.
Yeah, I noticed there was a picture that your sister found for Christmas, like a handful of years later.
Yeah,
both of you with your red hair.
Yeah.
Or was that a sibling?
No, that was her.
That was her.
Yeah. My sister didn't have that red hair.
Okay. So just you and your sister then?
Yeah, just me and my mother had the red hair. Yeah, and the siblings, just me and my sister. She's 3 years older.
Okay. Amazing. And what did your mom like do throughout the years? Like you said, like, so when she was in Ireland, she couldn't work.
But the rest of the time she was a book buyer at, before it was finally sold, it was like that Tom Hanks movie. I forget what it was called, where they, it was like a Barnes and Noble place buys the last independent. They were the last and oldest independent bookstore in the world. It was called the Moravian Bookstore. And when they went, they were the oldest one. And she was a book buyer from them. My girlfriend handed me a Hybro gummy bear this morning, and she had a little bag. I was like, when I was in first grade, this is like 1976, because this is a German, ethnic bookstore. They had Toblerones and Hybro gummy bears, in 1976, before all that stuff came out. So I grew up with her working there, and it was, walkable distance, and I would go in there a lot, and I knew everybody there. And so we were sort of a fixture there for 20 plus 25 years, I think she worked there.
And that was in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
Okay. So are you a Steelers fan?
I grew up being an anti-Philly guy.
Okay.
We're like equidistance from Philly and New York, and I grew up just like no to any Philly people, and so I was a Steelers fan. But we're 60 miles from Philly. We're a long way from Pittsburgh, and so now I'm, my sister's an avid Eagles fan, so now I'm more of an Eagles fan. But I still have a warm spot for Pittsburgh, but I have a warm spot for Baltimore too. So I don't really care who wins the next one.
Who doesn't matter.
Yeah, I like them both.
So Quicksilver Scientific, you have created a lot of, like you said, kind of, it started from a personal pain point.
Yeah.
Right. A personal biological low.
Yeah.
And I think that's how a lot of us get into this space, right? Like, I've dealt with low T. I've dealt with hypothyroidism. Like, I've been there. Like, I've been down those routes, and that's how a lot of this came about for me. Does some of the later lines, as you've gone on to create more, is any of that really like tied to like the relationship with like your mom? Like, do you feel like you like watched her go through a lot of that stuff where it was like,
absolutely. It's like, it's funny how self-serving everything is, but it's not like I'm out here on an island. I'm the only one dealing with mercury toxicity. The most recent stuff we did was Lyme, because I had Lyme, and I'm not the only guy out there. But you say my mom, well, I made this stuff Cardio Elite because my mom had heart stuff and high blood pressure all the time I was growing up, and then during COVID, I had to go, someone on our team got COVID. I had to go and get tested. And she's like, yeah, your blood pressure is 105 or 150 over 105, and I'm like, what? Where'd that come from? And I was like, is that why I'm feeling ungrounded? Because I've really felt like I'm about 2 inches off the floor all the time in my head. And And sure enough, it was. And so I eventually, put together a cardio product that had all the aspects of all the cardio stuff out there, all the nitrates and citrulline, the seaweed extracts for the epithelium. It was or Chinese herbals. It was a beautiful product, and it's totally taking care of me. And then I have that cascaded down through into my family, all the hypertension, and my sister, who never had any of it, passed some of that genes along and married a guy who had terrible heart issues. And so it's just like cascaded through. And so now, I worked that all out. Now I, got to get the rest of my family on it. And I wish my mother had been on it.
Yeah. What about you have created like an entire line for menopause.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's probably my favorite long sort of story and development. The amount of help you can give to a woman going through peri and menopause is astronomical.
Yeah.
More than, because it happens to everybody, it's bigger than anything that you can really do for guys, arguably. And the shift, you go through andropause and you just slowly lose your testosterone signaling and stuff, but it's nothing like the jarring impact of life change that peri and menopause bring to a woman.
Yeah.
And even back when I was doing just Mercury detox stuff, I was like, why do I have such a substantial proportion of my clientele that's around 50 years old? And these are people who, they come, they have these symptoms and they're very Mercury-like symptoms, but they've had amalgam since they were kids. Like, what's going on here? And, fast forward, 15, that's back in like 2009 to 2012. And then you get up till now, we're making all these hormones, 10 years later. When the hormones go down, so many different functions go down. And so your own inner detox system is run by this trigger called NRF2, which senses free radical stress or toxin stress and turns up synthesis of all your antioxidant and detoxification things, glutathione, the enzymes, the transporters, all the stuff to either quench a free radical problem or ship out a toxin problem. And it gets weaker as we get older, and we didn't always know why does it go downhill so much, but some of the cofactors for it to work are hormones. And so the pregnane X receptor works with NRF2, and that is responsive to pregnenolone and progesterone. And those just fall off a cliff. And in women, the estrogen to progesterone ratio is a huge thing for poise, for balance in the brain and the neurotransmitters, and really the whole body. And so women through their 40s are experiencing their progesterone goes down first and then their estrogen. And so they have this decade of relative estrogen dominance. And one of the things that does in the brain, estrogen stimulates the glutamate receptors, and that makes you anxious and irritable and bitchy. In a good way, it also makes you on it. And that's what makes you a good multitasker, or, when you're young as a woman and you're taking care of the kids and you're, getting the food ready and you're, handling like village life, you need glutamate for all that stuff. But then when it gets unopposed by progesterone, which works on the GABA receptors, which gives you some cool during that, then you just have this constant going. But a lot of the toxins also accentuate that. And so Mercury does, and it goes in there. And one of Mercury's main, symptoms is to drive anxiety because it's hitting these receptors. So the women are getting to this age, and progesterone is not supporting the neurotransmission balance. It's not supporting the detox. The detox failure is allowing the toxins to build. The toxins are accentuating the disconnect in the neurotransmission. And, it's really painful. And they lose a sense of themselves and their peace and their groundedness. And
because
androgens are going down too.
Nurturing anymore.
You're you're not comfortable. There's two aspects. It's inner and outer aspect. The inner, you're not comfortable in your chair, in your seat, in your standing place in the world. And on the outer, you're sensing danger all the time. And so that winds up and they're just kind of a mess. My girlfriend came to work for us. She was, just stopping cycling completely, and her head was just like, as she says, it was just a mess, and I just couldn't focus, and I couldn't feel comfortable, and like, this is all just, and then it was head of education under me, had to learn all this freaking crazy complex stuff from me. And she's just like, I can't even handle it. And put her on those hormones because, long before we released them, we had them all in the bag, and I was getting intellectual property together, put her on that, 2 days later, she was like, oh my God, I am freaking on it. I'm thinking straight. I'm getting a divorce, and I'm moving forward. Yeah. And, it's just amazing. And it's just been like one after another story of like righting women's ship. So I think there's two ways through menopause. You're either going to suffer through it and get all the way to the other side and adopt, more of the crone position in the tribe, or you're just going to keep those things going. And you're going to keep all those hormones going. You're going to keep the way you were doing things going. I think it's like a cruel joke that we lose the hormones just about the time we've got any semblance of freaking wisdom in the brain. It was like, whoever those, UFO overlords were that came and programmed this shit to happen this way. That was just cruel. Like, by the time they can get their shit together, let it all drain out.
Yeah. I like that. So progesterone is in that line. You talked a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to do hormones, you have to hit these couple buckets, and the main ones are DHEA, testosterone. Those are androgens.
Yep.
Estrogens, and we'll talk about estriol versus estradiol versus estrone, but it's really estriol and estradiol, and then progesterone. Then the last one to bring in is pregnenolone. And pregnenolone is the first thing that's made after cholesterol and becomes the mother to everything. But, those are the main ones you have to replete. Now, in our line, we have, the consumer line is called core hormone support, and then the more potent pro version is called DHEA plus. Women, you can drive DHEA levels up very high, very safely. DHEA is a beautiful thing. DHEA is is made by the adrenals, has a ton of different direct functions in the body. It interacts with androgen receptors, estrogen receptors, drives metabolism, cognition, cardiovascular stuff. It's a wonderful general hormone, but then it becomes testosterone, and then testosterone becomes estrogen. So it becomes a precursor for all of your sex hormones.
Yep.
And so in these lines, testosterone can only come out of pharmacies. So in women, you can drive DHEA up, and if you stack the rest of the supplements in there correctly, you'll drive it into testosterone very, very nicely without making too much excess estrogen. You put aromatase inhibitors and, a couple of adaptogens in there, and you have high DHEA, high testosterone. So you've got all the androgenic signaling going. Androgenic signaling is what creates drive, whether that's mental drive, will drive, or sex drive. That's all coming out of there. And lean muscle mass, that's coming out of there for androgen. So we drive those up pretty high, a little higher than normal women's reference ranges. And frankly, women in the 50s really like that. It's sort of a second. They're not raising kids anymore. They like being on it, being a little bit more, guy-brained. And then you do the progesterone and the estrogens through topical nanoserums. And that's, topical cosmetic law allows certain amounts of estrogen and progesterone into those products. And so progesterone, the first need is that bring all those androgens up. and we'll get you up like 600. And a lot of these women are at like 40.
Yeah.
And, there's just the tank is empty, the brain's empty, the drive is empty. And so you bring that up. Then you have to do the estrogen progesterone thing. And depending on where you are, if you're real peri, you probably have enough estrogen. Then estrogen starts swinging all over the place. So we're going to bring that in at a certain rate. But progesterone is the main one to create the calm, chill,
improve sleep,
handle
quality.
handle stress, and the sleep goes through the roof. In fact, our progesterone, a lot of the guys use low dose progesterone because it helps them sleep so much.
Yeah.
And it is such because it's a big GABA agonist. It just calms you down. I remember when I had a sublingual of it first. That's for the compounding pharmacies. And I remember when I was, women are bitches when they're bad, guys are dicks. And when I was being a dick, my ex-wife would say, I think it's time for some progesterone. And sure as you're born, like one pump and okay, honey, what was that I was upset about? Oh, sorry.
I'm good now.
I'm good now. And like, it is the universal Zen hormone and has applications to men and women. In fact, a lot of women believe that men, so you have follicular and luteal. So the first 2 weeks of your menstrual cycle are follicular, and that's when you have low progesterone. And then the second 2 weeks in luteal, then you go to a high level, which is preparing the lining for implantation. And a lot of women or a lot of doctors believe that men should have the same as a follicular level woman's progesterone, which rides around 1, I forget, nanograms per deciliter or something.
Yeah,
and often we're a lot lower
it's
than
like
that.
point. I think it's like 0.2 to 0.4 for men.
Yeah, and women are around 1, and it, and so a lot of people believe that men should ride a little bit higher. And that there's, especially if you're taking tests, there's a lot of people, if you're taking higher tests, you're going to get a little progesterone with that too. That's just going to balance out, give you cool, just give you some cool. And so that's the progesterone. And then there's the estrogens. And so there's estriol and estradiol. Estradiol is what everybody's afraid of. Everybody's afraid of it because of the highly flawed Women's Health Initiative studies that were done a few decades ago. And they stopped the studies because they thought that all-cause mortality was up if you ever even said the word estradiol. Yep. And then it turns out they hadn't stratified their populations right. They didn't separate right. They didn't see if people had estrogens before and what kind they'd had. And when they reanalyzed it, like all-cause mortality was lower if you've ever even touched estrogen. Yeah. And so it turns out it's a huge thing. And, in Europe, they never stopped giving estrogen, but here they did. They totally stopped it. Everybody's freaking terrified it for the cancer risk. All right. So if you are, estradiol will drive cancer growth. If you have that, if you're like super, if you're genetically predisposed for it, there are risk factors with it. It is real, but everybody also grew up with this stuff and they were running levels of like 300-400, and now we're afraid to run somebody at 50 to 80. It's like, okay, come on. So there is estradiol. There are real things with it, but you can't let it go down to nothing. There's a plenty of range to work in where you'll get the cognitive benefit, and that was only shown with estradiol, not with like Premarin, which is the horse estrogen, and none of the non-bioidentical forms. And we could talk about bioidentical, non-bioidentical, synthetic, what all that means. But you do need some to get the neurological benefits, the bone, the cardio benefits. But then a lot of the benefits of the estrogens are pelvic floor. And so when people talk about vaginal atrophy, they'll say, well, that's just vaginal dryness. No, it's more than that. It's thinning of the lining of the vaginal walls. It's prolapse of the abdominal floor. I mean, these women will get like nets sewed in because everything's falling down. Chronic UTIs. Just going and going over and over and over again. And, again, that tissue's, getting lax and stuff. Well, turns out there's two estrogen receptors, estrogen receptor alpha and estrogen receptor beta.
Okay.
And there's these two main estrogens, estradiol and estriol or estriol.
Mm-hmm.
And estradiol hits both of those. Estriol only hits the beta and does nothing to the alpha.
Mm-hmm.
The alpha is the proliferative one. The beta is actually anti-proliferative. And all the vaginal tract, urinary tract, pelvic floor receptors are all beta. So you can use large amounts of estriol or estriol and get all of that tightening up of the tissue, the vaginal moisture, the UTIs going down, and we've seen it time and time and time again. And we do estriol as what we recommend a vulval topical, so it's close into those tissues there.
Mm-hmm.
And women report just like a total turning back of the clock in terms of the tissue integrity.
Mm-hmm.
Moisture takes like 2 days to come back. That's easy. But like really fundamentally thickening the walls, tightening the lips, increasing innervation. This is happening over months. And every woman is like, I can't believe it. This stuff's beautiful. And so I had, one doctor had reached out to me, Mary Cohen, and she does all these breast cancer cases and has them all on estrogen. And she's like, you have to do an estriol standalone so we can use high doses of that, get all that benefit, and I can low dose the estradiol to keep it above hot flashing and get all the benefits, but not have it up at proliferative levels. So that whole landscape is so easily navigated. The only problem we have is people's fear.
Because of one study.
And there's tons of studies that said nothing but good
people
things.
Just aren't willing to like look deeper. Like they're not willing to
not look deeper. And the doctors never look backward. The doctors don't ever look at the literature. I mean, not the cool doctors, the functional and, the biohacker people. They're all integrative. They all do that. But the regular doctors won't read the literature and see that all this stuff's been repudiated. They get all their education from the drug companies. And why aren't the drug companies in all this hormone stuff? Well, they got into it in, 60s and 70s. But here's the deal. I can't patent testosterone. It's a naturally occurring substance. Mm-hmm. That's called prior art. It existed before. I didn't come up with it. So I can't patent estradiol. So to go through a $500 $1 million study or $1 billion study to turn it into a drug, but you can't control it, you don't want to do that. So they started creating non-bioidentical versions of these. Now, where people go wrong with their language is they talk about bioidentical versus synthetic. Every bioidentical hormone, every test you've taken, everything is synthetic. Mm-hmm. And people like to, you're going through your head like, wait, what about the wild yam? And, it's wild yam derived. Like, this is the biggest bullshit. Like, you would need more yams than the whole earth can hold to get enough estrogen out of them. But they have a precursor that has a steroidal hormone backbone that they can easily synthesize into estrogen or progesterone or testosterone or DHEA. And so that's how all those work. There's a natural precursor, and then they synthesize them into the different hormones. So they're all synthetic. Non-bioidentical means it's not the same chemical form as the bioidentical. So they would make these variations on estrogen that would strike the estrogen receptors, but they would be chemically different so they could patent them. They would make progestins, these chemical variations on progesterone that would strike the progesterone receptor, but not be bioidentical. But then there's multiple other things that the hormones do, and they trigger lots of different things. And these aren't all hormone receptor-based actions. And so when you have part of the action, but not all of the action, you tend to get into problems. And if you don't have the same affinity to hold on to the, get into the receptor, activate it, and then release, stuff will get stuck in there. And that's where the pro-cancerous parts of hormones were. Those were from the non-bioidenticals, and they were actively carcinogenic. I mean, there was a lot of problems around there. And then, you think about, things like different pesticides and herbicides and PCBs. I'm thinking about that one that caused all this cancer. I don't remember it right now, but PCBs, all the environmental toxins that are phytoestrogens strike the estrogen receptor alpha and stick onto it and hold it and overactivate it.
So
that's
for,
how
for the audience, we're talking like you're talking receipt paper, like that stuff, right?
Well, those would be like those are parabens and different plasticizers and stuff, and so that like a BPA is on the receipts and stuff. PCBs those are big 1960s and 70s. They were used as lubricants that wouldn't burn, and tons of them got into the waterways through the factories that are making them. That was huge. Atrazine was the pesticide that was incredibly carcinogenic. That's when Jill Carnahan talks about her story with breast cancer. She grew up on a farm where the atrazine levels were through the roof. And so these environmental toxins, and all anything called an endocrine disrupting compound is an environmental toxin that gets in and screws up hormone signaling. And a lot of them are carcinogenic. And a lot of them we'd see that we would call them obesogens because they would overactivate estrogen receptors on boys, and they would, grow man boobs and be obese. And at the same time, they were blocking sirtuins and all the things that made us cardiometabolic fit. And so the point there is that, those toxins go after the estrogen receptor alpha, just like some of these, non-bioidentical hormones did. And they have the same pro-cancerous effects that the bioidentical hormones do not have whatsoever.
So all in all this came from mercury poisoning.
Yeah. Where else did it come from? Yeah. It's like, what was your path, and I was such a nonlinear guy. Everybody wants to hear it a certain way. They want me to say, well, when I was 5, my mother was dying and I realized I was the one who was going to save the world. And it's like, no, I dropped acid in college. I left college. I was an organic farmer. I was a biodynamic farmer. I worked at a organic farming research place. They sent me to Disney World. I met my wife. I was given talks at Epcot Center on the future of farming, organic farming, the world food supply. Met this French woman that was really hot, married her, had to go back to graduate school, went for farming, pollution, and then went to a PhD and ended up doing it on mercury. Environmental mercury, then ended up getting a patent on the testing, then started a company, then decided I had to fix the toxicity, started making nanoparticles, and then started making everything. Real linear, right?
No.
Yeah.
A little bit all over the place.
Yeah.
So did you live in Europe?
No, we looked at that. I've been there a ton of times. She was she grew up between Nice and Monaco. And looking at graduate school, we looked at some European ones and some American ones and settled on being in the U.S. And we've been here ever since, with my French-American sons, Pierre and Thomas, living this hybrid life.
Just 2 boys?
2 boys.
Yeah.
Yeah. One's off in Dublin now. The other one's in New York City.
Okay.
Yeah. Being
what
a
do they
DJ.
do? DJ?
Yeah. Well, he was a business logistics guy, and he was at FIT, Fashion Institute of Technology. He was first at UC Boulder, and there was these riots during COVID and this huge party, and he got swept up into that, thrown out of school, hauled into court. We got out of that, and it was really good because he was pretending, he had these crazy parents, that do all this wild stuff, and he was like, I'm a square fraternity boy, and pledging his fraternity, gets arrested, and when we'd gone looking at schools, we went to New York City first, and he was like, oh my God, I'm home. But he didn't get in NYU, so he didn't go. And so he's going to CU, and then everything blows up, and he's like, fuck it, I'm going back to New York. He goes back to New York and just gets a job waiting tables and waiting to get into, because he was a clothing head. And I was like, I'll get an FIT. And he did. And he's all punk and frat boy, deadhead, Colorado boy to New York punk. And then he was setting up his career there. And then he started DJing and started taking off. And he's like, I'm just going to keep doing this. I'm like, do what you want to do.
Yeah.
And then the other son's in college for architecture in Dublin, Ireland.
Architecture. Amazing.
Yeah.
Interesting. So a question I always ask my guests to wrap up the show. As you can see, podcast, Intentional Health for Women.
Yeah.
It's something I created, intentional strength training, almost 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in the health and fitness space for a decade, was 400 pounds at 19. Like, I've been through it all.
Wow.
And when I moved out here, someone had an impact on my life. And as I was like looking, it just like a word had just kept coming up, and it was intentional.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where it all
Yeah.
came from, is as we step into this, we're 10 days, into 2025.
Yeah.
Fires, we talked about your house burning. What does it look like living intentionally moving into 2025 for you?
For me personally?
Yes.
I'm setting up, I'd been always growing my business for the business more than for me.
Okay.
And always this, your startup guy's dream, you're going to grow it and sell it and blah, 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 and take all your money in one load. And I was playing that game, and the world was like, no, you're not. And, I almost sold the company a couple of times. Something kept blocking. I was like, no, you're not. No, you're not. No, you're not. And so intentionally this year, I'm actually splitting it into parts and starting other companies where I'm growing these things for me, and I'm growing Quicksilver for itself like a child. And so spreading out more that I can do myself. I'm putting a team in place to take care more of the child, but make sure the vision's correct, while I set up other things that are more about myself, and set up my life that's more about myself, and get myself in, not wait for this, liquidation to get into having my boat and where I want to live and doing the traveling I want. I'm going to make that all happen now and make everything, efficient and beautiful, and be the life I want.
Yeah. Building your perfect day.
Yeah. That's what I'm going to do.
Love it. Where can we find you?
Yeah. Quicksilver Scientific on Instagram. There's Quicksilver Scientific page. There's also Dr. Christopher Shade at Instagram. And on our website, if you get an account there so you can order online, you'll get our newsletter. And if you're a practitioner, it's really important, whether you buy from us or not, or if you buy our products through a distributor, that you get an account with us, because all of our educational material is inside there. There's 30 or 40 webinars that are each, hour and a half long. There's a learning management system on toxins and detoxification system. There's a whole module there. There's a whole module on hormones. And so there's just infinite resources in there for the practitioners.
Love it. It was an absolute honor. I appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate the questions you ask, and you get in. Thank you.
Absolutely. If this episode brought you value, please subscribe, share with a friend, and leave us a review. We are not normal. We are intentional.